All right, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. This is a kind of a special meeting here, more webinar than meeting, and it was my pleasure that Dave offered to give a talk to the committee on the Northern Tornadoes project and the path ahead. And there's quite an interesting history on this, David, and I'm sure you'll probably give some of it, but this was a kind of a what I call a special funding program to try to document every tornado in Canada, or at least as many as possible, to find out what the true, or at least get closer to the truth and what the real risk is like up in Canada from tornadoes. And there have been an awful lot of fascinating findings, at least from what I've seen in journal articles and also social media and other venues on this, and it's gotten quite a following, I think, up in Canada, and quite a good community network has spawned out of this. So yeah, thought it would be great to have him here because a lot of the stuff that you're doing up there is got a lot of relevance to some of our mission here with the committee. So I don't want to, David, I don't want to continue this, but you are out of Western University, and you are the executive director of the Northern Tornadoes Project. Done a lot of outreach with this. So I'll let you go ahead and carry the floor, and I'll get out of the way because I want to make sure that you have plenty of time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the invitation. And let's hope the technology behaves today, and we'll enjoy the presentation. So as Jim said, this has been an interesting project. We started in 2017. One of the things that makes it interesting, I'll see if I can get to the next slide here. Oh, there we go. One of the things that makes it interesting is that we've got a major, well, actually a single donor, Impact WX, and they're a social impact fund out of Toronto. And you can see the mission there is enable organizations who, through scientific understanding and public awareness, work to improve people's response and safety during severe weather events. And the founder behind Impact WX is actually a very avid storm chaser, and decided to do this kind of philanthropic work in his community, helping fund a project like this that would otherwise probably not get funded. So Western University is the place where it's centered, and the major funder aside from the university is Impact WX. So this is the core project team. You probably know Professor Greg Kopp, who is the Impact WX chair at the university. So he and I are the co-leads on this project. And then across the way, you see John Hanasak, who they have a meteorology program at the University of Manitoba, which there is no meteorology program at Western. So he's got the meteorology program and the students and that kind of thing, whereas we're more engineering over on the Western side. But we've got a combination of meteorologists and engineers that are full-time and part-time. And we've also got a lot of connections to the library at Western. They were looking for a project to go, help bring the library into the digital age, and they've really put their claws into this and said, we're going to run with this, and they certainly have. So there's just been a lot of positive things that have really pushed this forward. We've got partnerships in the private sector with the Weather Network, which is like the Weather Channel, Instant Weather, which is it's a social media aggregator site that's got maybe several 100,000 followers. We get a ton of reports from them. CatIQ, which is an insurance-based outfit that we get insurance losses from. And we collaborate with Environment Canada quite a bit and have a wide network of crowdsourcing contributors. So there's no shortage of enthusiasm across the enterprise in Canada for this project, which has been great. We also have an external research team, And these are experts in social science, soil science, tree engineering. You'll see some of the names and recognize some of the faces. Unfortunately, one is not with us anymore, Arn, who recently is deceased. We'll really miss him on this team. But all of these people are contributing to improving the way we do things and working on the science of that. And as you'll see in a second, there's an operational side to what we do and a research side to what we do. So all of the research is geared towards helping the operational side. So that's what most of this is about, is trying to improve the way we can sense crop damage and tree damage and that kind of thing, so that we can do a better job of doing the detection on the operational side. And here's where I go into that. So the main goals of NTP are, like I said, this is twofold. There's operational and research goals. The operational is to advance the knowledge of what our true tornado occurrence and risk is in Canada. We've had an idea for the past 30 years or so of what our tornado occurrence and risk are, but it was mostly focused on populated areas because that's where all the data were. And so what we wanted to do was go beyond that and try to find evidence of tornadoes in those unpopulated areas up in the forests, because 90% of our population is located within 100 miles of the US border. So there's a lot of Canada that is not populated, and we need to know what the tornado risk is there. And all of the data that we collect are made available via our open data portal. And then there's the research side. So here we're trying to improve the detection and the assessment and in the future prediction related to tornadoes and other severe convective storms. So we're looking at improving the way we can detect damage in forests and cropland, prairie grasslands, artificial intelligence methods for detecting these, engineering analyses to improve the building code, improving radar-based detection and nowcasting, contributing to the new EF scale standard that we're all a part of here. And I'll talk about all of these in more detail later. So first, talking about the operational part, which is the part I run. One of the things we do right off is we do tornado outlooks so that our field teams are prepared, and not surprised when we ask them to get out there as fast as possible. So we have a team of meteorologists that work on these and take shifts doing this through the summer. I'm on the rotation. So we provide these graphic outlooks and descriptions and so on. And they are posted to social media and made public if there is a likely chance of a tornado, or a chance of tornado is likely or higher. So that's just kind of like a public service. If we do find that it looks like there is a good chance of a tornado, then we want the public to know about it, even though our products are, it says right on them, experimental, not meant for operational use. The best tools that we use to do these outlooks are US based. So we've got the US SPC, the SRAF, the HRAF, that's very useful for us, the HER. But these only cover Southern Canada. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done coming up with better tools for us to do this in Canada. And we have engaged people out of Environment Canada about doing this, and who knows, maybe it'll happen at some point. That'd be nice. So once we know that storms are possible, we're usually watching radar in real time, watching social media, looking for public reports. So just some examples of the detection of a big hook echo that went through the Ottawa area in 2018. So we knew that there was a big track through there. It turned out there were 7 tornadoes in that area that day. US MRMS, the multi-radar, multi-sensor program is useful to us as well, as we can look at hail tracks and rotation tracks and get an idea of where storms have gone through to look for damage. We're actually working with them to try to incorporate more Canadian radar data into their systems so that we can get things like rotation tracks well away from the US border. And then on social media, we actually have our own accounts. And so we might say, if you have a report, tag NTP with @NTP_reports. And this really is taken off. So we've got a lot of people tagging us during severe weather events, and sometimes in a big event in an urban area, a flood of data coming into us with photos, times, details, and so on, which is great. Then once we know that there's damage, we have a variety of ways to investigate. The best way, of course, is to do the damage survey. So get the ground survey team out there. Usually they can do that within 1 day, sometimes 2 days, depending how far away it is from London. And when they go out and do a ground survey, we have drones with them now. Every time we do a survey, we do drone as well, sometimes generating an orthomosaic, so basically putting the drone up, letting it do the grid pattern, stitching it all together so we have an aerial, and that drone imagery is less than 2 centimeters, so very high resolution. A lot of our events, we look at all our events with satellite using planet.com. Some of the events, if they're kind of on the weak side and they're well away from populated areas, we'll just use the satellite imagery to get the details of the track and do the damage assessment there. But if it's more significant, then we'll actually have an aircraft fly over. You can see the kind of detail that you get with the aircraft imagery, 5 centimeter imagery, so you can see the details of the tree directions, which is what's important. You don't quite get the same detail as with the drones, but as long as we can see what direction the trees are down, we can start to differentiate between tornado damage and downburst damages, and that's what is important in a lot of these cases up in forested areas. So a bit about the assessment process. You know, as all of this data is coming into us from public reports and different things, we're populating a Google map with all of these things, showing where damage has been recorded and where storm tracks are and that kind of thing. And this is used in the field to help guide our surveyors. And as you can see, you can click on any of these and get the full picture of what's available there. We also have an ArcGIS Survey 123 app that the library created for us, which we use in the field to collect data. So this app is installed on tablets and basically collects all the data necessary on the damage survey. So all of the details, time, location, all that is automatically brought in. Then you start choosing the damage indicator, the DOD, all that stuff, and you can take pictures with it. And once you hit send, all the data goes back to the server at Western, and I can actually watch in real time as they collect data, which has been really great. So after that, then we can create investigation maps. You can see an example here where we start having, you know, where the survey crew went. The blue is on the pictures from on the ground. The orange is drone photos, and be able to put together a picture of what happened during this particular event at a high resolution. And we use those for preliminary classification and intensity rating. So we often work collaboratively with Environment Canada on a preliminary assessment. The idea being that they want to get something out to the public as soon as possible, so 24 to 48 hours. But we do both recognize that these are preliminary assessments. And then NTP goes to work to get all the rest of the data. And sometimes it can take weeks, sometimes it can take months to get all that data together. But we work on the final assessment and then let Environment Canada know what we found and publish that as well. And that's what appears in our open data. So a bit about the open data. We have an interactive event dashboard, which is shown here. What I'm showing here is all of the events between when we started in 2017 to this year. So 945 events that we've identified, 335 of those being tornadoes. So you can see where in Canada all the tornadoes have occurred. So this is an integrated, this dashboard is integrated with a GIS backend, so you can actually do searches and then send the data off to a file and send that to someone or whatever. But and you can filter using a bunch of different things off to the side here. I've circled one event here, and And what you can do is drill down. So if you click on the EF2 tornado there, it brings up this event summary map with all of the data collected for that event on it, all in layers. So what this is showing here is the tornado track in black, the rating and the worst damage location here, so EF2. This was a downburst near the end of the track, so we use a kind of an oval to represent where the area affected there, rather than a line like with a tornado. And all of the blue dots and the orange dots are all photos from the ground or photos from the drone. And then you can see some of the colored in areas here where we've got orthomosaics that were generated from the drone flights. So if again with the we can drill down in this area here, and this is what we get with the drone orthomosaic. So you can see the details of every tree, and quite detailed. You can move anywhere within that mosaic. And then you can drill down even more. You can see that there's the tracks of the survey crew, and there's a blue tag here, and that means there's a photo available. So you can actually look at the photo that was taken in that spot. So you basically can drill down to the raw data that were collected during that survey. We also started doing, and we call them Fujita-style analyses, and that's because a lot of these bigger events that we're seeing where their EF2s are higher have a combination of tornado damage and downburst damage, and you really have to get into looking at the actual damage vectors along the damage path to get an idea of which parts are tornadic and which parts are downburst. So with this event up in northern Ontario, Brooks Lake, you can see quite a long track. So this is almost 32 kilometers. The width is 22,440 meters, which is now the widest tornado documented in Canada. We could only rate it as EF2 because it's up on the Canadian Shield, and the trees go down fairly easily because of the thin layer of soil up there. But I think this could easily be EF3, looking at the vectors and looking at what the tree fall analysis people have found in the past with similar vectors. And we'll probably get them to look at this case in the future. You can see an example here of a zoom on the aerial imagery where the trees are just down and all completely down in a circle here, and there was a bunch of those along this track. Zooming in, you can see where the convergence is along the tornado center line here. And this was a big supercell. The radar up that way at that time was just an old C-band, so it wasn't great quality. You can make out this supercell with a big hook echo and debris ball. Like, this is 8 kilometers across, so this is really a large area. That's why it's such a large, wide tornado. The velocity signature wasn't that great with those older radars. The newer radars do a lot better with the velocities. But what we did find doing this analysis is, like I said, the long track tornado here, but also 33 different microbursts along the edges of the tornado, and you can see those in blue here. And that's not including all of the damage. There's little bits of damage here and there. These are just areas where there was a focused area of damage that was divergent in nature. So we found a lot of them with this particular event. And it makes it challenging. We've come upon a number of these events now with this mix of tornadic and downburst damage, and trying to separate the two is often really challenging. So we're trying to, as usual, we're coming up with new things on the fly to try to deal with the new science and the new, every time we go to a higher resolution, we run into more conundrums, more challenges, and that we have to figure out. So that's been the case all along as we've evolved. And then some of you have seen this before, so you can see this box here. So this is how we rate damage, tornado damage along a forest path using the forest box method. So this is an idealized tornado damage path here. The red is the detected EF0 damage contour. The maximum width has to be found, and then the sampling box is 50% of the maximum width, and can be moved up and down the tornado center line. As long as the center line is in there, it's fine. And what we're looking for is the percentage of trees in that box that are down. And that's what the Canadian EF scale treaty is based on. It's population based. So the DOD6 is greater than 80% down, and that if there's no caveats with soil, that can get you EF3. In this case, at Brooks Lake, it got us EF2 because the soil was so just lacking depth. But the idea is to get samples many areas along the track of the tornado to sample all of the different possibilities as far as the DODs. So you can go from EF0 to EF3 and then back to EF0 again. And that method is published in the BAMS paper that came out in 2020, if you're interested. And we're hoping that it looks like it will maybe be part of the forest DI in the EF scale standard work that we're doing here. So that's part of what we're talking about with all the tree group. So just looking at some of the results over the last 3 years, in 2019, that was the first year that we've expanded to all across Canada. Before that, we were just kind of doing pilot projects to make sure, well, number one, if we find anything in the forest, number two, if we could possibly expand the scope to Canada. It's pretty ambitious. It's a big country. So we did that in 2019. Thankfully, it was a relatively quiet year, so it wasn't too hard to keep up with it. So we did have some interesting things. We did our first damage survey north of 60 North, so Northwest Territories. We had one of the big events was on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border in the central area up here. 10 tornadoes in that outbreak over 2 days. Quebec it's the third year in a row. It had been very busy in Quebec, and they were very surprised by that because the prevailing thinking in Quebec is we don't get a lot of tornadoes here. And so we were kind of upending that and showing them that, hey, you're getting a lot of tornadoes here. And it turned out to be a 3-year run. It's been fairly quiet after that. We did manage to take that data from 2017 to 2019 and compare it to our last 30-year database to see, how things compare. So these graphs show this is the 30-year database, and this is the NTP database. And what's on the left is all tornadoes, and on the right is just the significant tornadoes. So one of the things you can see is that with the significant tornadoes in the 30-year database, the path lengths were quite long. The average was 23.9 kilometers, and it's less than that by quite a bit with our NTP data. And what I think is happening here is that in the past they just didn't have the data to be able to discern between 2 or 3 tornadoes in a kind of end-to-end that were separate. So they'd include them all together, and so you end up with this bias towards longer tracks. Whereas with the data we have, we can tell where one starts and one ends. So we're maybe getting more tornadoes, but they're shorter length. Looking at the maximum width, it's kind of the opposite story. With the 30-year database, with the significant tornadoes, it was about 400 meters was the mean max width. And with our data now, with the NTP, it's up way higher. It's almost double. And again, it just seems like it's because we're spending more time and effort trying to document this well, going from the beginning of the EF0 on one side to the end of EF0 on the other side, and picking up some fairly wide tornadoes in the process. So it is showing that there are some differences between the data that we're capturing now compared to what was captured previously. So let's go to 2020. We're getting more sophisticated at this point. So 411 investigations, 364 events. This was during COVID, and we really couldn't go out and fly across the country or anything like that. We basically could only go within a day's trip of London, and we had our team in Manitoba that went out one day. But for the most part, it was done remotely, and it was a pretty good test. It actually showed us that we could do a lot of this remotely, which is good to know. So as far as the events, there were 77 tornado events. We started counting tornadoes over water. So putting them together, it's 103 tornadoes. But we also had quite a few downbursts, 117 downbursts. The non-tornadic vortices are things like funnel clouds aloft, gustnadoes, and dust devils. Classified is when, with the data we have, we can't tell between a downburst and a tornado, for instance. So we try to keep those to a minimum, but instead of trying to dump things in one or the other, if it's just, it can't tell with the data, we just keep it as unclassified. Maybe more data will come in later. We had an EF3 tornado that killed a couple of people in Manitoba. We hadn't had an EF3, well, we had an EF4 in 2018 and some EF3s before that. And we also had just a lot of tornadoes, especially QLCS tornadoes in Southern Ontario. And that gave us a record number of 42 tornadoes in Southern Ontario, way above what we observed in the past. So I guess, if you look for them, you'll find them. They're out there, even in some of the more populated areas. And then we go to 2021. So this is the preliminary results from this year: 364 investigations, 259 events, and 99 tornadoes if you're counting the ones over water, which we are. Lower number of downbursts, so on. But you can see, again, a lot of activity in Ontario, some in Quebec. So we're setting some records here, but it's really quiet on the prairies. And part of this is that there were a lot of forest fires in BC, a lot of smoke that crossed central Canada and really shut things down. Plus there was the drought conditions here and the big heat dome and so on. So all of the activity seemed to get shunted off to the east this year. And so some tornado oddities from 2021. The first tornado to hit Vancouver since 1976. You can see it here. The airport is right on the ocean, and so this is actually over the ocean, but I'm sure they are having fits looking out over the runways and seeing this big tornado at the end of them. By the time it hit land, it was only EF0, but it seemed like it could have been a lot stronger over land, and it was clearly a supercell tornado as well. Very rare in November, so this really stuck out as an outlier. The first Nova Scotia tornadoes, actually two of them since 1999, and the strongest Nova Scotia tornado since 1980 at least. And so this is on the other coast, on the east coast. And it turns out we've got a couple chasers that live out there now. One of them is a chaser that used to live in the US and be quite involved with vortex and stuff. I think his last name is Hill, Chris Hill. And he retired to Nova Scotia thinking he wouldn't see much action up there. And instead he's out chasing tornadoes and documenting them for us. So I was happy to hook up with him and get this report from him. As I said, Ontario had a lot of tornadoes. It was a record number of tornadoes, 60 over land, or 60 over land and water, 46 over land. The highest number of F/EF2 plus tornadoes on record, over 13. We're still trying to figure out the plus part. And the third latest tornado on record at November 21st. So we seem to be getting a lot of late tornadoes, and I'll talk a bit more about that too. No tornado damage in Alberta. There were just 3 tornadoes, and all of them were EF0 default. So very unusual not to have any damage in Alberta. But most unusual was that there were no tornadoes north of the 49th parallel. And if you don't know, that's the border with US and Canada that goes across the prairies. between mid-June and mid-August. Now that's the 60-day period with the highest historical frequency on the prairies. And there's not a single tornado in that area or east and west of there. So again, it seems like climate change induced fires and temperatures really shut down tornadoes across Canada during the middle of the summer, much of Canada. So it does raise some questions about the climate change impact on tornadoes, and everybody assumes we'll see more. But if you've got things like smoke and heat domes, it's possible we will see a lot less. Okay, on to the research part. I said that I had that, these are just papers that we were putting together, or have put together. I got that bulletin of the AMS paper done in 2020, so that's out there. Sarah, one of our wind engineering students, led a paper on the design standards for resilience using NTP data. There's NTP funded research going on at UIUC. They're using the Elansa EF4 tornado data from Manitoba to do some work, and that was published in the Journal of Wind Engineering and Industrial Aerodynamics. It's I can't tell you how interesting it is to see American researchers using Canadian data for tornado papers. This is something we hadn't seen before. Connell, one of our research engineers, is working on a paper looking at the remote sensing of vegetative damage using NTP data and how it can help detect tornadoes in the absence of trees and structures. So we've had two major tornadoes out in the prairies. One was an EF4, one was an EF3. And there wasn't a lot in the way of trees or anything to hit. And so this is all crop damage here and grassland damage that you can pick up using remotely sensed data. And so the idea being we can track tornadoes in these areas that don't have trees, and also hopefully get an idea of intensity as well. So that's the part he's working on now, is can we derive an intensity, a tornado intensity of any utility from this kind of data. Something else, we had one of our meteorologists go back and look at high resolution satellite imagery back several decades to see if any tornadoes have been missed in years previous to NTP. And she's actually identified more than, it's actually up to 230 tornadoes now that are not in the records back to the 1980s. And you can see they're mostly in the forested regions of Canada, away from population centers, most of them in Ontario and Quebec, but far more than we thought there would be. So she's actually got a paper in preparation on that. I did a little paper last year looking at significant tornadoes in Ontario. There's just kind of been this anecdotal discussion among severe weather enthusiasts in Ontario, including the forecasters, that all of our big tornadoes seem to be happening later in the year. They used to happen in the spring, but now they seem to happen in August and September. And is there anything to this? So I actually got all the data together for Southern Ontario and found that, yeah, it's there is a positive trend, statistically significant, but it doesn't appear in Michigan or New York. So I'm not sure what's going on there. So that's currently in review, and we'll see. Well, that's in geophysical research letters, so we'll see if that I can get that out soon. Something else that I'm working on with one of our meteorologists is completing two tornado databases. One is that Ontario database that I used to do the trending work, goes all the way back to 1792 to 2020. And then the other is updating our national database. I showed earlier 1980 to 2009, and now we're updating it from 1991 to 2020. I think I said 2020 before. The previous database is 1980 to 2009. This one is 1991 to 2020. So we're just finishing that up, and that'll be the first time that NTP has done that. Usually it's Environment Canada. Well, usually it's me at Environment Canada, but now it's me at NTP doing this work, and that'll be available as open open data. Something else we're working on is, I mentioned machine learning and AI solutions to identification of wind damage in forests. Right now, we've got some of our staff are, poring over these aerial maps and trying to identify tree by tree what's going on, and it takes forever. So even an 80% solution of automation would be great, and we're trying to work on that. We've got some work done. This is work that appeared in that BAMS paper. So just some initial work to show that, yes, we can identify trees and what direction they're down and that kind of thing. But there's lots more that needs to be done, and the progress has been fairly slow here, but we'll get there. Something else, and this is more Greg's thing, the wind engineering side, and that's events with EF2 and EF3 damage really seem to show serious issues when it's residential housing. If it's lower than that, then you don't see enough damage to show the problems. If it's more than that, then everything is down on the ground and you can't see the problems. But when it's EF2, EF3, all of a sudden all these issues seem to show up. Issues like construction not to code. Here's an example from this Barrie EF2 tornado that caused a lot of damage this summer, where here's an example of the roof just kind of sliding off, and there weren't enough nails put in to keep it in place. Another one is this was a 2-story house with not a lot of damage to the first story. Some of the roof shingles were peeled off and some broken windows and stuff, but it actually collapsed in on itself. So obviously some construction issues there. So, and these are issues that we've seen every time we do an EF2, EF3 damage survey in a newer residential area. And it's, it really is annoying because all of these people you see having to get all their stuff and then leave because their house, they can't live in their house. And it's, it's really not necessary. In an EF3 tornado, the 2018 back in the Ottawa area, one of the issues was the walls and the roof would blow off, leaving the floor. So it was the wall to floor connection that was the problem, and that's a code problem. There's a gap in the code there that needs to be fixed. So it makes it harder to rate too. So anyway, this is something that Greg is working on, and after we'd seen a bunch of these in different events, he actually talked to the media about problems with the code and with code gaps, and boy, did that stir up a hornet's nest. There were, I think he probably did 100 interviews over the next couple of weeks about this problem, and all of the builders were upset, and the municipality was upset, and blah blah blah. But it turned out one of these houses in the Barrie area, one of the councillors in town lived in it, and the roof came off. So now she's a big champion of putting hurricane straps on houses in the area, and I think she's close to getting something passed, like a bylaw passed at council to try to put hurricane straps on all new builds. So you kind of have to take your lumps when you bring stuff up like this in public, but then things start to happen, and that's what he has seen. And something else. So it's hurricane straps that are going to keep the roofs on, longer roof nails to keep the roof panels on. These are some simple, inexpensive things that really help to keep the house intact. In fact, he's working with one builder south of London who has used these things and advertises himself as tornado resilient, a tornado resilient neighborhood. So let's hope that kind of thing takes off in the future. Something else we're doing is working with an NTP partner, Instant Weather, on a community radar app. So stage one is just having a basic processing and archiving app that's very fast on the web, and we pretty much have that done now, and that will probably be in the spring, ready to go to kind of subscription type service. And I think it will be competitive with things like RadarScope and that kind of thing. But where it gets important for us is stage 2 and 3, where we can develop new tracking, detection, and nowcasting algorithms, and have those put in here and be able to test and evaluate, and aiming for a community and open source approach. So that would be something that I think would be great to, just in the wider community, is to have this kind of open source approach to a radar processor. And then the contributions we're making to this group here. One example is the farm silos and grain bins that I worked on, and Tanya tells me that this was the first one to get done in part. So I'm really happy about that. But hopefully all of the others get done in part soon too, and we'll be able to move forward with having all of these new DIs to use. And then also we're helping to work on the tree DIs and even helping with the vehicle DI as well. So we're quite involved with a number of these things. Okay, so now on to what's going to happen next year. We're going to expand beyond tornadoes into hail. So the Northern Hail Project. This will start happening next summer. A good thing is we'll be able to share the existing IT structure with NTP with this new NHP. There's insurance-funded fieldwork in Alberta that we're kind of piggybacking on, and we've got this 5-year project that we're planning, and the money is actually starting to get approved. We just had our first $1 million approval. And like NTP, that would involve an operational hail data collection documentation, plus research activities. So initially, the main research activity would be implementation and use of severe convective storm monitoring test bed, where we've got a couple of C-band radars for Environment Canada. They've upgraded to S-bands, and there were 2 really good C-band dual pole radars that they gave to us, and we're hoping out of that to get 1 good portable C-band on a flatbed and plus parts, and then surround that by 10 Mesonet super sites. So that's the plan. Hopefully some of it will get started next summer, but the next summer after that, hopefully this will be all in action. And this is just the picture of your mobile. I'm not sure if it's portable or mobile, but a C-band, I guess it's more portable, C-band DAO kind of approach. And we'll be doing something similar, but probably more portable than mobile, that's for sure. And then lastly, this is something that we're planning to stand up in May, the Canadian Severe Storms Lab. So, I mean, you already, of course, know about the NSSL, and in Europe, there's the ESSL, and each of those have different funding models and so on. And we want to start up a Canadian Severe Storms Lab. We think there's the same need for Canada, and it will have a different funding model. But the idea is that we'll focus on all severe convective storm hazards. So as I mentioned, tornadoes and downbursts, hail starting next year, and then eventually SCS-related flash floods. And things like NTP and NHP would be programs that plug into the CSSL as it evolves. And we're actively pursuing partnerships nationally and internationally to make this as good as possible. So just to summarize, we're trying to use the best tools out there and techniques to ensure overall improvement in what we do. And we're increasingly successful at detecting, assessing, and documenting tornadoes that otherwise would be missed. And we're getting a better, more accurate climatology because of that. All the data analyses are publicly available through a portal. And that's become very popular in Canada to look at. The media looks at it, the forecast offices look at it, the public looks at it, it's all there. And lots of opportunities for collaborative research, especially as we move towards a CSSL. And that's it. Everybody's still there, right?
I think so, Dave.
Okay.
We're just riveted here, and I'm looking at the comments here with lots of woohoos and interestings and wows. And
Okay.
I think that's definitely, I guess, good feedback.
Sure.
So
Yep.
why don't we go ahead and do this? I saw there was Kishore put in one question here. I think I didn't mute anybody, but Kishore, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, otherwise I can paraphrase it for you. And,
Should I stop
with everybody else?
Should I stop sharing, Jim, so we can see?
Yeah, yeah, we can do that. Though
Okay.
you never know if somebody wants to take a look at your screen again. So
Well, I could bring it up again.
that's right. Yeah, Kishore.
Thanks, James. The question I had, this is the first time I've seen documentation of combined tornado and downburst, particularly the severe tornado you showed.
Right.
And I'm not familiar with the atmospheric science research that physically says, as I said, tornadoes are combined with downburst. The documentation that you've done, it obviously shows that. I'm just curious if there is a research done in atmospheric science that would say that that is a combined phenomenon.
Sure. Well, I mean, I call it Fujita style analysis because he pretty much was the pioneer in looking at that kind of thing. He has papers that very nicely detail where the tornado ends and the microburst begins and so on. I think in one case in Wyoming, he found 70 plus downbursts associated with a tornado there. And so we find this mix of tornado and downburst damage quite often, especially with the more significant tornadoes. Sometimes you start with a downburst and it changes into a tornado. Sometimes you start with a tornado and it changes into a downburst. And sometimes they are occurring simultaneously. And like I said, it is a challenge to pull them apart. And the higher resolution data we have, the more challenging it gets because the tree damage is chaotic in the first place. But when you start to combine those two things together, it gets really difficult. So we have that box method to rate damage for tornadoes, and we have to work on a similar kind of box for rating downbursts. And to this point, we've been it's been more or less experimental, including the downbursts in with all of the tornadoes. But we're going to have to get more serious about it now that it's becoming a big part of our database. So, just to say that it's all experimental in nature as far as tornadoes and downbursts, and we're learning as we go. And as I said, as we go down to higher and higher resolutions, it gets more and more challenging.
Yeah, thank you. A very well organized project. I think that's the credit to you. You've been working on it for a long time.
Sure, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions here? And thank you very much, Kishore. Let's see. You can certainly, let's chime in. It's a small enough group, so if you want to go ahead and just start speaking, that would be fine.
I see Greg's on the call, so he can answer a couple questions too.
Yeah, that'd be good. I think while people are kind of mulling questions over, I have a lot, but I'll streamline it down to just a couple here. But maybe Fred has some questions first. I'm going to give you a chance.
Sure, Dave. Just very impressive stuff. Very fun to see. I was just going to piggyback on Kishore's method or question a little bit, and I wonder if how many of your tornadoes get this kind of higher and higher resolution, finer and finer resolution consideration. If we looked at every tornado in the US and Canada, would we just keep finding more and more interesting things like that? Or do you think that there's something special about a certain class of tornadoes that has this extra stuff around it? I mean, I'm wondering, I'm kind of thinking that probably every tornado has interesting stuff if you looked at it closely enough. Do you have a feel for that?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that everyone we've looked at is unique and has its own surprises so far. But I mean, we've got quite a collection now of high resolution data for significant tornadoes. So, I mean, we usually, if there is an EF2 tornado or higher in a forested area, we'll either do drone imagery, or if we can't access it, we'll have flyovers. So yeah, we're getting quite a collection of different examples of these things. And like I said, each one has its own features, its own interesting take on how things fit together. And so we're having to learn as we go on how to interpret these things, because that, some of these things haven't been looked at in such high resolution before. There have been projects, as you know, even with people we're working with at UIUC and so on, that are also looking at high resolution tree damage and that kind of thing. But just the number of different examples we have is turning up some interesting things. So I think the higher intensity tornadoes tend to have some of the most interesting things going on with them. We have one of them that I mean, you've seen this in the US a bunch too, but after it does its worst damage, it then does a loop at the end, and trying to figure that out using tree damage was really interesting. We did manage to figure it out. It took us a while. We had an example this year where there was this really wide tornado path for an EF2 tornado, and just didn't seem to sit right. And after we did the drone imagery analysis, it turned out that there was a satellite tornado that came around the back of the primary tornado. And if you didn't know that, you'd think that was all one big tornado damage path. But now we can divide it into two, and it makes the widths more reasonable. So, we're finding all kinds of things like that. And again, when you throw in the downburst stuff, initially a lot of these tracks look really wide, like that Brooks Lake track. That's the record width in Canada. If you counted the downburst damage with the tornado damage, it approaches 4 kilometers across. So taking out the downburst damage, it's still a very wide tornado, but it's not crazy wide. So it's just a lot of work though to try to separate those out. We've got one person working on that full time basically right now.
That's super exciting. I mean, when you look back at all of Fujita's sketches and all of his work like that, you kind of see the complexity in these flow fields, and that seems to have been, nobody has done that for a long time. So it's really exciting to see this kind of reemergence of that complexity. That's very, very fun stuff. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, like I said, it's kind of out of necessity, because we have to be able to understand what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, could I ask a question? So, and we could have had this conversation some other time, but just given what I've been focusing on the last few weeks here, when I'm not grading papers, has convinced me of the tremendous value of this really high resolution imagery. And I'm wondering, not having looked too closely at the 2 centimeter stuff yet, what I have so far is 5 or 10 centimeter resolution. Is it feasible to figure out from looking at that imagery, and of course I'm thinking about the trees, the sequence, who's on top of who?
Yeah.
Because in terms of the modeling stuff that I've been working on recently, a big sort of gap in our knowledge is actually knowing who fell first and who fell later. And it seems like this imagery could be a way to extract that information without slogging out there and spending your entire life on one, 10 square meter area.
That's right. No, you can definitely see that. You can also see a lot of the details of the soil. Even what type of soil. You can see what kind of tree. There's a lot of things that you can see with this 2 centimeter imagery that really help us as far as being able to properly rate it and so on. So it's been a game changer to be able to get that drone orthomosaic capability.
That's a tremendous resource. We should talk some more about that.
Okay.
Okay, Brian, did you have anything, or see your video's on?
No, I just was going to say this is great stuff. I mean, Fujita would be proud of you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I was about to ask too, because I'm actually developing a new damage survey course for the Weather Service. We got funded to do this, and I really wanted to focus on the high resolution damage swath analysis like what you're doing, and now you are the group that's most active in this on the research side of things. But we have the directives to do it here for significant tornadoes as well, especially the contouring and separating out downbursts from tornadoes. You're sharing the same conundrums. So I guess, have you been developing kind of a set of best practices and things like that you share among the team or with Environment Canada and things like that, or how's that going?
Yeah, it's funny because as we go along, we run into a wall and say, well, I guess we need to develop a procedure for this, and away we go. Because it's obviously needed to make sure we're doing things consistently. And that's where we run into with coming up with ratings of downbursts in forests, because it gets so complicated, and we can't get into the details of like 200 microbursts or something like that with one event. So we're coming up with thresholds, what to count, what we just can't count at this point, and how to tell downburst damage from tornado damage, where to draw the line, how to rate it. It's different than what we're doing with tornadoes. So I'm hoping we'll be able to apply something similar to the box method, but it's going to have to probably be changed somewhat. So it's like we're creating procedures on the fly, and sometimes what we'll do is we'll use it experimentally for a year or two, and then once we get comfort level with it, then we'll operationalize it. And that's kind of what we did with water spouts too, because traditionally, I think it's the same in the U.S. The water spouts aren't counted as part of the official tornado record. It's the same in Canada. And because they are tornadoes, and because we're trying to get the true climatology, we wanted to include them. So we started including them for the first couple of years as experimental tornadoes, and then once we got the feel for it, we brought it into the official program. So now we count them as tornadoes. We count them separately as tornadoes over water, because we want to be able to compare the tornadoes over land to past data sets. But also a lot of our clients, in the media and that kind of thing, are still just interested in what hits land. So we're keeping them separate, but we can combine them and say, hey, this is the total number of tornadoes for the year. And there are people who are worried about it because it really ups our numbers in Ontario, especially with the Great Lakes. But it's really fascinating, including these events over water. We're getting events out in the West Coast, out in the East Coast, all over the Great Lakes. So it's been really interesting. So again, it's just we are confronted with a challenge. We kind of come up with an experimental procedure, and then we operationalize it after we develop some comfort with it and can do it consistently.
That sounds great. I think I'll be in touch with you. I'll have to step in line behind Chris apparently, but
okay.
Sounds great. Maybe there's room for one more question. See if anybody, if you want to turn on your video or microphone. Otherwise, I don't know if I see anything. It looks like everybody's quiet. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and call this webinar a wrap? David, thank you very much for doing this. It was fascinating, especially based on all the comments.
Sure.
You got a well-organized project, and we appreciate this very much for giving the time to do this presentation.
My pleasure.
I'll record. Got this recorded. I'm going to post this up on our WDTV web. This is our YouTube account that we have, and I'll share with the committee this presentation, and you can share it with anybody else too. Until then, David, thank you very much, and everybody else, thanks for attending, and we'll see you next time.